Welcome to the Life to the Full podcast. I'm Stephen McAlpine.
Chris Cipollone.
Great to be with you, Chris. It's been a momentous few weeks, and today we're going to take a bit of a tack on looking at the fluidity of our culture. Now, when you use the word fluidity in our current day, we think of more to do with identity, personal identity, gender, but we want to look at it in two parts. So this is a game of two halves.
We're doing a docuseries.
A docuseries, that's right. So 2 episodes. First half, we're going to look at the fluidity of the world, or the way the world is in what we would call rapid discontinuous change, and how that affects people's psyche, not just personally, but the collective social anxiety that we're experiencing at the moment. Let me start with these words. Why do the nations rage and the peoples plot in vain? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, let us burst their bonds apart and cast away their cords from us. Now, I read that Psalm 2 at an event I was at last week on a certain election day.
Yes.
And I said...
an American election day, just in case people are listening after the fact.
We haven't missed things. And I said to the staff at the time, well, we're all wondering who's going to be winning. And everyone nods and shakes their head, and I just read Psalm 2, and I went, that's what Psalm 2 is about, actually.
Yeah.
So we're coming from a Christian perspective about the fluidity of our culture today.
Yeah, and then episode 2 will be, what impact is that having on us as individuals, within our hearts, our souls, our minds? Because it is disconcerting. The amount of change that we seem to see around us, I think, as humbly as I can put it, is is one of the reasons why mental health epidemics are as high as what they are. It's not the only factor, of course, but whether we talk about doom scrolling or whatever prism we talk about it through, the bad news sells, and it has an impact on us after a while. And part of that is just that the fall of institutions, the lack of things we can pin down and put our hopes in. It's hard and it's troubling. And as Christians, what difference does our faith have in that space? But you called it rapid discontinuous change, is that right?
Yeah, rapid.
Can you unpack that for us?
Yeah, look, I think in my shameless plug, second book, Future Proof.
Please do it.
Yeah, second book. The front cover has that picture that's like a tube all over the place. It looks like a pipeline that's just going in every direction. I think what we're experiencing at the moment culturally is rapid discontinuous change. We get on what we think is going to be a progressive cable car to the top of a progressive world, and we end up on a roller coaster.
Yeah.
And that creates cultural nausea. So I would say rapid discontinuous change, where things are 90-degree turns all the time. Politically, we've got rapid change with technology. We don't know what's coming next. We have black swan events.
Excuse my ignorance, I don't know what a black swan event is.
Okay, black swan event. Let's explain that one
Help
as well.
me.
I feel like I've just put all these terms out there, and we're
I'm
struggling.
a simple man, Steve.
Simple man with simple ideas. But here we are, right? So black swan event, there's no such thing as a black swan event, a black swan, until there was, right? So the whole idea that black swans didn't exist was used as, all swans are white.
Right.
Until they went to Western Australia, my hometown,
Yes.
and they realised, there's black swans.
Okay.
But black swans event is just something you could not see coming, but it just comes upon you.
Give us an example.
Pandemic, for example.
Right.
All of your traffic and all of your direction is going towards, globalization.
Yeah.
It's going through real-time, packaging, getting things to you quickly. The supply chain is built upon movement.
Yeah.
Suddenly, a black swan event happens
Right.
that changes those things.
Yeah.
And everyone rushes to get toilet paper.
Yes.
That's what I mean. And it also fast tracks things. So, for example, my wife is a clinician, which we talk about quite a bit.
Yes, we've talked about having the wrong McAlpine on the podcast.
Yeah, we
before.
have. But there was always a push that eventually we'll get to doing sessions more online than in face-to-face. And clinicians would have said, there's no way that people will switch. Black Swan event.
Right.
And then suddenly, and this is true of the psychological issue, was that when the pandemic struck Australia, the health department said that they would not give you Medicare rebates at the same level for online.
Yep.
And within a week, they changed because they suddenly realised every psychologist is going to say, well, we're not taking clients.
Yeah.
That's a black swan event. That's the change. And what it's done, and we noticed this in New South Wales and Victoria compared to Western Australia, is that the number of people who will settle or even want only telehealth
Yep.
has gone through the roof.
Yep.
Whereas in Western Australia, with few lockdowns, most people still want a face-to-face contact. That's the rapid discontinuous change. What we saw coming as the future, maybe 10 to 15 years' time, a black swan event, shuffle that to the front of the pack.
Yep. And it makes me think it does two things. It breeds innovation and opportunity, but it's also tiring to pivot. There's two sides to it.
Yeah, and everyone who loves the innovation and opportunity, well, there's always a payout.
I remember I was on staff at a church in 2020. I wasn't excited about the prospect of COVID, but I was excited about testing all of our assumptions of church and going, what is actually up for grabs here and what can we do? Whereas I remember my colleagues were just like exhausted by the whole thing and I was energized by it. And there are, I guess, to use a binary language, two kinds of people in the world when it comes to that kind of stuff.
There are people who say there are two kinds of people. And they don't.
There you go.
That's true. And so that's really what the rapid discontinuous change has ramped up. So the question is, and we'll discuss this over the 2 episodes, is it rapid discontinuous change that is causing our social anxiety, or is it the fact that we know about rapid discontinuous change at a level that we didn't in the past?
Yeah. I definitely feel like, and I'm going to risk sounding like an old person here, on the one hand, every generation has always shaken their fist at the kids and gone, back in my day, we did it this way. It does feel like something exponential has happened since, I suppose, the internet, or even before that, personal computing, and now AI. Like it's not just that we're changing; it's the speed of change. And someone said to me the other day that AI is the 4th industrial revolution. You know, there's just a whole bunch of things that have now been tossed back in the air. There's going to be winners and there's going to be losers, and those who can't adapt are probably going to be the ones who are going to lose. But not everybody can adapt. And I must admit, I can't help but look at rates of change and go, how on earth do we keep this up? What is the end point to this speed that we are innovating? And is that even innovation? You know, that's another part of the conversation.
Well, that says to you that we innovate without making any ethical framework decide.
Because we always push the red button. Humans have. When have we ever said, as a global community, actually, probably
that's
not
enough.
that?
Yeah,
right. We don't do that.
No, we don't. A good illustration of this, I think, when we say, "Where's the limit for humans?" So we all know that we're limited, and there's a great book about being limited, and that's a good God thing, right? Kelly Capage's book on this issue, worth a read. But I think of a bit like the 100 meters, right? The race. Everyone says, what's the human limit for 100 meters?
Yep.
And it can't be 1 second.
Right.
No, but we're bringing it down incrementally,
Yes.
and Usain Bolt still holds the record, 9.5 something. But everyone is... it's conjecture. Can we bring it down under 9 seconds? Well, there has to be a limit. Surely that extrapolates out to absolutely everything else in our cultural moment. Yeah. So I drove here today and it took me 53 minutes in the rain.
Welcome to Sydney, Steve.
Yes, thank you. But when you look at the first ads for cars in the 50s, the cars were for leisure. Cars were for driving along the freeway, which is fairly empty, to the Denny's or whatever it was that people, or even in England, the little chef they called them.
Okay.
You'd stop and have a meal, and now cars are for something different.
Yeah.
And cars are there to buy you more time, so that you can do more things.
Yeah.
And that's a flip.
Yes.
And that's rapid discontinuous change at one level, but it wasn't so rapid discontinuous. It was slow discontinuous change this morning on the way here. So you see that aspect of it. And then what that does, it ramps up the level of, cortisol, anxiety. And so you see people are shorter with each other.
Yep.
Everything is more, and that's an external thing. And then you see the rapid discontinuous change of Sir Keir Starmer is the most popular Prime Minister in the UK for 3 months. And then he's the least popular.
Yes.
And why is that? Because they found out that he was getting his clothes and his wife was getting his clothes from a wealthy benefactor.
Right.
Whereas, 200 years ago, good on him. He needs to look right.
Yep.
And now we pay out on Sir Keir Starmer for looking like the Prime Minister should do.
Yep.
And so you have this churn. And that's an anti-institutional issue as well.
Absolutely. And you can't speak anti-institution without thinking about the impact on the church as well. The pivoting that's happening, we use the term falls from grace, probably not a theologically accurate point, but you understand what I'm saying, that sandstone organizations, including churches, huge change. I wrestled with this when we started this new ministry. It was, I remember driving between my home and our office, which is about 25 minutes, or the offices we were looking at the time. And I think I counted about 15 churches along the way, and wrestling with, what do I do? Do I re-enter pastoral ministry? Do I do this? And just thinking, there are so many buildings that would have been populated 50, 100 years ago that are now, for whatever reason, multitude of them, no longer being populated. But I don't know of a ministry like this that we're thinking about. And so that became the impetus. But my point being that church as an institution, I think, as Christians, is one of the very disillusioning things that we have to wrestle with. Not because we don't believe in the church, but to be honest, it can easily feel like we're on a losing side or a sinking ship, or whatever paradigm you want to use there. And that's hard to reconcile emotionally and also spiritually.
Well, that's why you're finding a much more crunchy neocon religious framework. And I don't disagree with some aspects of it. But there is certainly we're not going to be the losers. We're going to try and win the culture back.
Right.
That happens both in theologically robust conservative communities, but it also happens in secular settings as well. So what you see in the cultural anxiety at the moment after the recent US election, every time you feel a little bit down with yourself, just go on to Threads or just go on to watch a video of people melting down.
Yeah.
But it isn't just outsiders melting down. It's you go onto the mainstream media and you realize, wow, and this is not a take on Kamala Harris per se, but when her backers on we're paying $1 million to come on to run a flawless campaign alongside her, as Oprah Winfrey was paid $1 million. And then her supporters and even those within the media say, but she ran a flawless campaign. She had the heaviest hitters from celebrities. And you go, but people don't trust those people anymore.
Meanwhile, Trump's going on for free on Joe Rogan and knocking it out of the park.
This is Joe Rogan, right? So this is the rapid discontinuous change as well. Joe Rogan, libertarian, bit rude and sweary, UFC guy or MMA, whatever it is, voted for Obama twice, Bernie Sanders once.
Yeah.
And what his superpower is, I just want to be interested in everything.
Yeah.
And so Kamala could have gone on that show for free.
Yeah.
But chose not to because she wanted, this is the other thing, because she thought that her framework had the power to say, I'll do 45 minutes. And he said, we only do 3 hours.
Right.
So 30 years ago, if the presidential nominee had said, I'll set the agenda for what your show looks like when I come on, you would have said, yes, ma'am, or yes, sir.
Yes.
Now they go, I run this show.
Yep.
And that's flipped.
Yep.
So that shows the anti-institutional framework.
Yep.
But it also says that it's fluid because a libertarian like Joe Rogan, if you're a conservative person in America, you go Joe Rogan. But then you look at his framework of what he thinks about life, what he thinks about ethics, what he thinks about sexuality, and you go, well, I'm not sure that's me, right?
Yep.
So you have all these competing things where people are putting together a grab bag of ideas that are not necessarily cohesive.
And that's, I think, one of the really hard things is that the benchmarks change. So it's like, I like a bit of A, I like a bit of B, I'm going to try and construct C out of that. But the problem is orthodoxy as a concept changes constantly. And there's concepts of identity there and belonging. Like, am I with this person? Am I with this person? I like some of that. I'm going to cancel that. But to use the classic example, the issues of sexual ethics in the church being a key one, this thing that felt non-negotiable 15 years ago is now the topic of the day. And you're trying to wrestle with the speed of that change and finding where you fit in those tribal conversations. Wherever you land on that is not my point. My point is going through that process and working out, who are my people, and what if I make a stand here and I don't belong anymore? That's a really unsettling thing to have to deal with.
And you see that too with and the language of a convert to a new cause comes to the fore in a secular stage, I've noticed. And I've noticed that with people who were liberal and then get scorched by their own crowd for not being progressive enough.
Yes.
And they swing and they go, hang on, That wasn't me.
Yeah.
And that's what you've seen in the American situation, that the same people that voted for Obama, 12 years ago, didn't.
Yeah.
And didn't, and race wasn't an issue, and suddenly it is, or the conversation, how it goes.
Yeah.
So it's a very complex time. Now, Mark Sayers,
Mm-hmm.
in his book, A Non-Anxious Presence, and on his podcast, talking about going through a grey zone.
Mm.
So part of the cultural discombobulation, the anxiety, is that we're in a period of what are we bringing with us to this new world,
Mm-hmm.
and what are we leaving behind? Now, that sounds a little bit woo-woo in one sense, but I think he's right. And Rod Dreher's new book, which is all about the spiritual world and exorcisms and stuff that doesn't sound like the Benedict option, which was his first book.
Yeah.
His third book is about how to live with wonder in a secular age. And he said, it may not be the end of the world, but it is the end of a world.
Yes.
That's the key,
Yeah.
is that the current anxiety is that a way of the world operating has gone,
Yes.
and a new way is coming, but we don't know what that is.
And I would say that that's been the story of humanity from the start. Industrial revolutions, agriculture, discovery of fire. You go right. We humans are very adaptable, and there's a made in the image of Godness to that reality that we do have a way. Actually, now you're talking about this, I remember there's a documentary called The Creative Brain. Not a Christian who's put it together, but he's a neuroscientist. And the whole documentary opens with a squirrel foraging for chestnuts or whatever squirrels eat. I don't know. I'm not American. But he says, what would the squirrel have been doing a million years ago? And he doesn't answer it, but the rhetorical assumption is he would have been doing the exact same thing. And the next scene, they pan to the San Francisco skyline, and he doesn't say anything. He just contrasts it, that humans have always adapted. And that is, in his thesis, what it means to be creative. As a theologian, I say, well, that's what it is to be made in the image of God. But there is comfort there in that, yes, it is scary to have to leave a world behind, as you say. But we've done it before. Again, I think there is something unique about the speed with which we're changing now.
Yeah, the speed.
But the adaptability still remains within our minds, bodies, and spirit.
And I think that's the image of God thing, where, it's the quip that was made recently that I read, that chimpanzees have been taught to answer a lot of questions that are asked by humans, but they've never asked humans a single question. It's that difference between humans and everything else. Yeah. And that's part of what we mean by life to the full. It's human life to the full. How do we navigate and steward the created order that we're part of?
Yep.
And at the moment, it feels like the created order is starting to overtake us a little bit.
Yes.
Not in terms of nature of red and tooth and claw, but the world that we're creating, especially the AI world, feels like less manageable than we anticipated.
And I feel like theologically a key paradigm here has to be the providence and sovereignty of God. Like I think, and this is probably dovetails into the next episode, but it's sovereignty, I think, can be used in our church tribes to permit human inactivity. God is sovereign, so therefore I'll just sit on my hands and do nothing for these 80 years. I don't think that's the application. But there is a point when so much feels random, out of control, chaotic, that and we can't do anything to fundamentally change this tidal wave that is upon us. I think Christians have an ability to have a counter narrative there of, I don't fully understand what's going on. I don't know what this new world will look like, but I trust that Yahweh is the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And so that has to count for something. During these recent US elections, it made me think, like, we get so caught up with whether we're stoked that Trump is in for another 4 years or we're fearful that the world's going to end as a result of it. Either way, we have a very short-term lens of history. But actually, if we zoom out a little bit and see that empires have always risen and fallen, and yet God has remained, I don't know what it's going to look like, but I know that God will be there. And that has to give me some level of comfort in the midst of it.
Yeah. Do you think of the three great places in the scriptures where there is apocalyptic literature?
Mm-hmm.
The book of Daniel.
Yep.
Huge seismic change. If we think we've had a lot of seismic change, Daniel was taken into exile during the one kingdom.
Yep.
And we read at the end of chapter 6 that he survived through to a totally different kingdom. So you got the next 6 chapters are apocalyptic literature, dealing with that churn of history.
Yeah.
And then you get to Jesus talking about the temple being destroyed, and he gives apocalyptic frameworks. Like there's something behind this. And then you get to the book of Revelation.
Yeah.
And so at all three major crises moments, you think, as you look at the people of God, you see God revealing something behind it. And you think, well, what does that mean? And what does that number? That's not the point.
Yeah.
The point is sovereign God in control. That's where I think Christians have their superpower at that level.
Yeah.
That there is an invisible world,
Yep.
and that God is in charge of both the visible and invisible world, and that should dial down our levels of anxiety, and also at that point, therefore, dial down our levels of freezing in the headlights, because that's part of the issue. That why is there so much inertia with people? Because they're frozen in the headlights of what do we do?
Yes.
And they'll either react.
Yeah.
It's the classic. You flee, freeze, or fight.
Yep. Yeah. I think for me, the key to this conversation that you've opened up is the A world versus the world paradigm. That I hadn't thought about it that way before, but I really like that A world, as you've always known it, is passing and possibly already has passed, but the world will continue.
Yes, I think that's critical.
Yeah. And again, I think the mental task of that is it is going to require energy from us to be able to pivot to a degree. And I know pivot's an overused buzzword, but there is an aspect where we are going to have to adapt. But again, Imago Dei, made in the image of God, we can do that in union with him.
Yeah, and I think culturally you look at how institutions rise and fall all the time historically. And that's perhaps what you want to say, is that part of our fear is that we are ahistorical.
Yeah.
So we haven't seen the big sweeps of history. That's where I think a book like Sarah Irving Stonebreaker's new book, Priests of History, deals really well with. In an ahistoric age, one of the key features is cultural anxiety.
Yeah.
And she is saying that as you look over the sweep of history and you look forward as a Christian in the sweep of history, cultural anxiety dials down. So that means your local church can still be in Struggle Street.
Yes.
It can still be in a place that's, a country or a setting where you're not sure how things are going to go politically or legislatively for you, but you don't have to be anxious at that level, regardless of where you are. And that's not a, just smile and be happy situation, but that is saying we can offer something more and showcase something more to our culture than what it's currently experiencing.
And we forget that when we read scriptures. We forget that Jeremiah saw very limited results in his life. We forget that Joseph was in prison for years upon. We read these in pages, but when you think about walking in those shoes, there would have been deeply uncomfortable days. But to your point, in the meta higher level sense, it is fundamentally going to be okay. Kay Warren talks about this, that the difference between happiness and joy is that she says that joy is the settled assurance that everything's going to be okay. And she's saying that after a huge family tragedy. She's not saying it while she's on the top of the mountain, but the peace that transcends understanding. And I'm probably dovetailing into our next episode, but these kinds of things as Christians make a huge difference as we navigate these changes.
Yes, I think we will talk about the internal fluidity issues. How it expresses itself externally, the chaos, I think, is you see swarm mentality. You know what I mean by that? That an idea takes root and it can travel very quickly because of the way we do technology. And suddenly there's a tone and a mood. Abigail Schreier talks about that issue, and you see social contagion issues.
Yes.
And, the whole idea of the witch trials of Salem, where you read Arthur Miller's plays.
We're no better. Yeah. We haven't progressed from that.
we haven't gone beyond the swarm mentality aspect of things, have we? The social contagion issue has stuck with us as humans. Regardless of the tech, we have not been able to technique it away.
Yes.
And that's part of our cultural churn at the moment. And Jacques Ellul would talk about the way we do technique, or the mechanistic issues that we use to try to be gods, to try to be everywhere. So our technology says you can be in two places at once.
Right.
But you can't, and we try, and it's a bit like Usain Bolt's record. There will become a limit to how we can do things.
Yeah.
There'll become a limit to how many multitasking things you can do in your week.
Yeah.
And the reason people are often struggling is because they've been told, here's the benchmark of the new norm.
Yes.
And then that gets ratcheted up all the time. there will come a point where you can't run 9.2 seconds.
And there is theology. John Mark Comer talks about this. He says, people say, "Oh, I wish I had another 8 hours in the day to rest." It's like, no, if you had another 8 hours, you'd fill it with 8 hours more stuff.
Yeah.
And so therefore, it actually comes down to an internal discipline to go, I'm human, I have limitations, and I am the biggest hypocrite on this personally. I want to maximize, I confuse, you can do anything with you can do everything. I've never found a good balance with that personally. I live with a Messiah complex almost every day of my life, but I have to remind myself, actually, God has given me limitations for a reason. There's theology in the limitations and there's mercy, because otherwise I would just be manic.
And isn't that when you read people say, well, I only need 4 hours sleep a night, and you go, is that are you morally posturing to me? Yes, you probably are, to say that I'm better than you. And you wonder how that works. So I think culturally there'll come a breaking point.
Yes.
And I think we're probably reaching it. Jonathan Haidt, when he talks about many of these issues with social media, with young people and the anxieties, he's going to deal with that internally, but he's saying it's the social aspect of anxiety that is most driven by our technologies. And one of the responses is become a monk.
Yep. Which people are doing.
Exactly. Yeah. And so let's move to Poland.
Yep.
I know people that did. I know people that moved to Poland to get away from the Western framework. But you'd have to ask yourself, it will just creep up on you.
Yeah.
There's only so many Polands you can go to before you reach where.
Yeah.
And I think that's that's critical, I think, to realize that you can't do it that way. It will chase you. It will hunt you down. And the exponential aspect of AI is absolutely huge.
Right. Yeah. So, Steve, as we round out, I'm going to give you, I'm going to serve up a home run for you.
Yeah.
Tell us about Future Proof. It is related to all of this.
Yeah.
Tell us why you wrote it, and you're a big brain. You could have written about anything. Why was this on your heart so much, and where can people get it?
Yeah, thanks for that plug.
By the way, he didn't know I was going to do that in Steve's defense.
I did not know that he was going to do that. He says, reading off the script. Future Proof is really a follow-up to Being the Bad Guys as to where is it all going now. And I was dealing with the anxieties of the age, and it was tilted around what will happen after the Queen dies. That was the question I asked. And then she died, so I had to change the book. But it felt like the end of an era, a stable era of relationships of mutual obligation, as we call things, to an era of personal identity era of personal choice, and this rapid change happening all the time. And so how does the church counter some of those narratives of isolationism, of the fracturing nature of our culture? And I dealt with that in the first half. We can out-relate, out-purpose the culture and outlast the culture because of the biblical framework. But the second half of the book, I deal with anxieties and acknowledge that Christians struggle with these things too.
Yeah.
I do not want us to think that we get a hall pass from that just because we're Christian.
Yeah.
So dealing with what does it mean to be in the culture war issue, the churn of that, because it's affecting us. What does it mean about climate change? All those things.
Yep.
And I deal with them from a lot of that sovereignty issue. God is sovereign. How do you, that you've got to have a good theology of God's sovereignty. So that's really where I'm going in that book, to say that in the long run, in 2054, rather than 2024 or 2025, what does the church need to look like to be a faithful, flourishing community in whatever the rapid discontinuous change, wherever the direction goes?
Yeah, that's good. Thanks, Steve. Thank you for this conversation, always illuminating. So next episode, we will look at how do we internally respond to all of this. We've touched on some themes, but that's the external landscape that we are now part of. What does that mean for our internal well-being? And to use our catchphrase, what does it mean to have life to the full in the midst of that? So thank you for joining us, and we'll see you for the next one soon.
Yeah, good to be in the halftime report, and we'll get some oranges and go onto the pitch for
and
the
some
second
double
half.
shot lattes. Modern oranges at halftime. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks so much, Chris.